podcast.
Daily solutions. Daily solutions. Daily solutions.
Podcast.
All right. Hey, everyone.
Hey, this is Ashkahn.
Graham is my name. And today's question is
Today's question. So,
Woo!
I'm
Bring
excited
it
there.
home. What books do you keep in your float center retail, and do they actually sell?
Okay. Let's do the first part first.
All right. So, Book of Floating, A.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
We also publish books, so we keep all of our own books
We're
in
getting
there.
a little bit biased, yeah. Those are the best books, and they sell. We can't even keep them in stock. They sell so fast.
So let's go through the ones that we offer really quick.
Okay,
So there's the John Lilly books.
Yeah.
I guess separate from what we publish. There's any books by John Lilly are good. There's the Float Center specific ones. Too.
Yeah, we don't carry like his whole fleet of dolphin research books in our shop or anything.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So the float books, which are Deep Self, is probably the most floaty.
Yep.
One of his books. We don't publish that one. Center of the Cyclone has good stuff about floating in it. Programming and Metaprogramming also has good floaty stuff. Those two we do publish. There's Tanks for the Memories.
Yeah, which is
kind of a co-written sort of thing.
with E.J. Gold.
Yep.
And there's The Scientist, which is, more autobiographical.
Yeah, so kind of like almost a sequel to Center of the Cyclone if you haven't read it, but has some good float stuff in there too. John Lilly So Far also has some good float stuff in it. And I think that's the range of John Lilly books we actually carry in the shop.
Yeah, that sounds right. No, I don't think so. We might carry one of his dolphin books.
Just for I think we carry Mind of the Dolphin.
Yeah, I think
we do
so
carry
too.
that one too. Okay, so that's the John Lilly ones. Back to our publishing company.
So yeah, we have a handful of books basically created from our kind of various artistic programs we've done through our shop. So having different types of people float and then create certain things afterwards. So the first one we did was an artist program. And so we have an art book of 150 different pieces of float artwork.
Called Artwork from the Void.
We did a musicians program, had a bunch of bands float and create music afterwards that we...
Never made a book of that.
That's not a book, I guess. Yeah, that's right. That's just a thumb drive or it's online. We did a chef's program. So we had a bunch of chefs float and create recipes.
Yep, called Flavors from the Void.
And we recently did a writing program, kind of short stories or poetry kind of combined into a single book that we just published.
Called Letters from the Void.
There's a theme there, if you can tell. But so those are our books that we have published that we also carry in our shop.
Yep, we carry the Float Tank Cure, Shane Stott's book.
And then from there, I think it gets into more ancillary stuff. So we have two books by James Nestor. One of them is called Get High Now Without Drugs, which is just a really fun book to have around. So it's just a variety of different interesting ways of messing with your brain and your senses. And one of them is float tanks. There's a little page on float tanks in there.
In there.
Uh-huh. And he has another book called Deep, which is all about free diving. And he doesn't talk specifically about float tanks in there, but it is a lot about these crazy free divers and their experience of being in water. And John Lilly makes an appearance in that book.
Yep. And then we have Blue Mind by Jay Nichols. And, James and Jay are both speakers over at the Float Conference as well. So they've kind of talked about float tanks. They actively like them. And Blue Mind is another one, just, again, about the neuroscience of how our bodies, or I guess just our brains, neuroscience of how our brains react to being in a water and around water and generally near water and drinking water and everything about water, which really ties into the float experience too.
Yeah.
And both of those are just a great read too. Deep
sure.
and Blue Mind are really excellent reads.
Yeah, Blue Mind's great. It does actually talk about floating in it as well. And is that it? That's everything?
I think that might be it for what we sell. Then we have a few others that we just keep on display. But yeah, that's it for retail, I think.
I think so too.
If we're missing anything, it's not kind of in the big top sellers of books anyway. So the second...
Do they sell well?
Well is such a relative term, you know?
And so what is to sell, really? Like,
Our entire capitalist economy is basically just a construct.
yeah,
so.
It doesn't, it's not something that should be admired or... So not real. I mean, they don't really.
Great, it's not. We're not living in the Bahamas off of book sales from our float center.
Yeah, like there's certain ones of the books we've mentioned that we haven't re-upped an order in over a year at least. Like our stock of 15 or 20 of them will last quite a while.
Yep. Yeah. So not great. But that said, retail in general is not something that sells awesomely in our float center either. And there are some float centers that really knock it out of the park with the retail, and the retail sales are doing good. But I think largely those are set up as retail shops. It's almost like retail is really a big portion of what they're spending their time setting up.
Or they have something, they have like yoga going on too. Yeah. They're just doing something where there's a lot more people walking through their store on a day-to-day basis than you get at a float center.
Because, a lot of people know where they want to go when they're doing retail shopping. And a float center is where they want to go when they're floating. And we found that, despite trying to push a lot of different things, there's not as much crossover there. So, relatively to overall retail, I think our books do good. And, well, they're okay.
I mean, it's also like books are, I think, a harder thing to sell in real life.
Than like color therapy glasses, for example.
Yeah, the other stuff we do sells better, but it's like books, like even if I wanted to look at a book, kind of in my head, I'm like, I'm probably just going to buy this on Amazon, or I'm going to buy like an ebook or an audiobook, or, you know what I mean? Like there's so many kind of reasons to not just buy a book on the spot nowadays. So I think that's in a way that doesn't exist for color therapy glasses or some of the other retail that we have.
Supplements.
Yeah, right. You're like, okay, I'm just going to buy it. I want to take this right now or try this.
Yeah, so goodish.
So here's the positive.
Yeah,
here's the good thing about this is that like of the things that you could sell, it's a really awesome thing when someone buys one of these books because it doesn't just mean that you made a little bit of money or you sold a retail item or whatever. It means they're about to go read a book that's all about float tanks, and they're about to learn a whole bunch about float tanks or about John Lilly or about free divers, and therefore some about John Lilly, and like that's really great. Like it's kind of the best thing you could sell. Like the book of floating is an awesome thing to sell because that person's about to know a whole bunch about float tanks.
And even if they don't actually take it home and read it. Even if they're one of those people who buys a book and then puts it on their bookshelf and is like, I'm going to get to that someday, and they never do.
Nobody does that.
Then it's there. It's sitting on their bookshelf, and it's kind of an advertisement for floating. Yeah. Or in the case of the artwork from the Void or the flavors from the Void, the cookbooks, I've gone over to people's house and completely unsolicited, I'm sure, not because I just happened to be visiting. They had those set out on their coffee table, and that's an even better advertisement to floating, which was kind of a lot of the impetus, too, in doing the artwork from the Void, is this idea of kind of passive advertising. If one of your customers walks home from the float and not only bragging about it, but having this book they take with them, how cool if someone then sees that and starts asking them questions and kind of prompts this whole conversation about their time in a float tank.
Yeah. And even one step back from that, I'd say just even having these books in your lobby, like for sale, is great. Like I've had a lot of conversations with customers about them, and they don't end up buying any of them, but I get to give them a little tour of like, oh, this one's really cool, it talks about this book has this sort of info in it. And like that right there is a good interaction, and it lets them know that, wow, there's all these different books with different types of information on floating. Like that by itself, I think is a benefit. And even like one step back from that, just like having a copy of some of these books to like have on your coffee table in your float center is great. Yeah. That gets used all the time. People constantly, like before their floats, after their floats, they're sitting on the couch. They're always picking up the books on our coffee table and thumbing through them.
I mean, I honestly think there's no reason not to have 5 copies of pretty much any book that loosely relates to floating around. Mm-hmm. Like one copy for your coffee table, and even if it's just a couple times a year, someone really connects to that book while they're on your couch and wants a copy for themselves, like having those to be able to sell to people too, so you don't just have to give away your coffee table version is really nice. So, I mean, there's so few books that actually deal with floating. Why not carry some copies that you can have on display and just for customers to flip through and Ashkahn said out on display.
They make nice gifts too. Like it's an awesome thing to give to a member on their like 10th or 20th float or something. Like, hey, you should take one of these home, like the Book of Floating. Like people are stoked when they get something like that, and it's good for you too. Like they're kind of like amongst the better things I can imagine giving a good customer as a gift.
But are you going to retire based on your book sales? Probably not.
No, but you should still have them.
All right. So any more questions you have, go over to floattanksolutions.com/podcast.
And we'll read them on our computer after you send them, and we'll judiciously decide whether we're going to answer them or not.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.